I wanted to show you guys the router table that we're going to be using to put on the roundover for the 2-drawer case that we have, that shaker style one with the wood table. You know, it'd be nice if we could, with this router here, just put it into a trim router and go around the edges and do both sides to get our full round. And we can almost do that here. If the bearing sits high up on the edge, just run along. The problem is that once we route the one edge here, we flip it over to the other, we don't have a spot for our bearing to run along anymore because we have a round over there. So in a situation like that, we're going to use a router table because we're not going to reference the bearing, we're going to reference our fence. So in the case of this router table, this is our fence. Both sides are dead straight. Both sides have been joined. Both sides are dead straight, and that's the most important thing that we have here. Also, one side here doesn't have the cutout in, so this is where the bit would be sitting out from the fence. And here's where the bit is embedded into the fence to some degree. Okay? This is the variety that we're going to be using today because the bit's going to be in here and we're going to be doing a quarter round, a round over on the bottom of it. Taking the router out, there's a clamp. Undo the clamp and then rotate the router out to the base counterclockwise. We get to the bottom here, you have to lift up and turn. It's got a little bit of a lock there. The reason for that is if it did come out loose, if you didn't lock that clamp back up again, it would just drop out of the router table there and fall to the ground to your feet. So it's a good feature. When we set the router table up here, we always want to make sure that it's sitting on the table and won't be pushing across the table as we're going to route. So I just get some orange clamps, offset them so they're not in your way. Right, so now I can walk right up to this and the clamps aren't in my way. This router is a quarter cable. I've talked to you about routers in the past. This is a fixed base router. So a fixed base router doesn't have the option of being able to plunge into material. It's going to have a base that sits at a certain height, and you make the cuts based on that height. We're going to take this bit out. 2 wrenches, and they're at a little bit of angle so that you can find exactly what you want to be to loosen this up. If you remember, we're loosening the top nut off the bottom, so I'm going to hold the bottom. I'm going to offset this wrench that I can grab with my hands here to loosen that top off there. Now, we've seen this before, where the bottom here has a little bit of taper to it, so when it comes in, it compresses that sleeve, and that holds the bit in there. This bit has a 1/2 inch shank. The bit that we're going to be using has a 1/4 inch shank. So the collet that I have here is a 1/2 inch collet. If there's not a collet that has a 1/4 inch hole to accept this over there, we're going to use a collet reducer here. So this fits into the 1/2 inch, has 1/2 inch outside diameter, 1/4 inch inside diameter, and then our bit goes into that. When you set the bit in here, you kind of see that on the bottom edge of this is a little bit of a round over. It's only about a 1/16 of an inch, but it's a little round over. In telling you that, all I'm trying to say is don't bring the shank all the way in so that you're biting onto the round over. You want to make sure it sits out just slightly so that you're biting onto the uniform diameter of the shank. And that gets locked in. Wrenches. By the way, I'm grabbing the router here, I'm grabbing the bit. I'm doing this all while this is unplugged. Kind of important. Okay, remember the routers that real fast moving jobby with the carbide bits. We want to make sure that we're not doing anything dangerous there. Gotta have that in there. It looks good. I'm just gonna give it a final snug. Okay. And then this goes back in. Rotate it up. Okay. Now, if I want to use all the bit, then I just want to make sure it doesn't get any higher than, if I hold this here, that we don't want to see these corners right here come above the surface of the table. So I'll set my ruler here, and I want to make sure that that corner stays down below the surface of the table. You can see now that I'm not hitting that corner. That means that it's low. It's lower than what the tabletop is. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that clamp. Okay. Now I'm just going to check to make sure. Sometimes the clamp, as you square up the, or as it becomes tightened into that base there, will change its height a little bit. I'm just going to go back and make sure that I haven't done anything to alter the height of my bit. It looks good. All right. Next thing I want to do is I want to get it so that it would be as if I was running the bearing on here, but I'm not going to be running the bearing on here. So I'm going to put this thing I want to get it so that my fence here is even with the bearing. So I'm going to put this ruler just like that. And then I want to be able to clamp this fence down. To do that, I'm going to get one of those vice grip clamps. I'm going to grab 2 of those right now. These have quickly become my favorite clamps to work with in the shop. I can get them very tight, things don't move when I have them. And if I had some that were dedicated to this tabletop here, they would always be set to the right spot. I'm going to go ahead and clamp that there. And then with this, it doesn't really matter if I'm perfectly square from the edge here. I just gotta make sure that we're out to the right spot. So right there's where I want to be. And I'll clamp this one. So I want to make sure that when I run my ruler across, I am not being able to rock back and forth with that bearing being my pivot. I have a little bit of rock back and forth, so I'm going to move my fence up a hair. Try that. That seems pretty dang good. Now, when I route this, when I route along the edge that goes with the grain, so the edge, not the end grain. When I route along the edge, no concerns. I don't have any chip out whatsoever. It's going with the grain. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and make that cut. I'm going to put you guys back over there again so you can see it real well. Okay? I'm going to turn the router on. And whenever I plug this in, I have to understand that this may turn on immediately. So my board's not touching things. We're in a good spot right now. All right, you're gonna get some dust in your face, folks. Here we go. Well, if you're doing a more complicated or more of a setup for routing, what you always want to do is to have a piece of scrap wood and you practice your first cut on the scrap wood so you get an idea of what it's going to look like. Okay, even with this one, I probably could have taken a look at this first and seen that this is not a perfect round over here. It's got a bit of a peak that I'm going to have to sand off later on. I'm just going to have to live with that. That's what I've done. So always go ahead and practice on something first to see what the cut's going to look like. When I go against the grain here on the end grain, I have to watch because as I exit and go past the bit, it's going to chip out my wood. So I want to make sure that I have something behind that that's going to be a backer piece that's going to prevent that chip out. This is just a squared up piece that I'm going to follow my board with. If the board has a little bit of a warp to it, then you're going to have to kind of roll it through. And now if I'm doing the side that it kind of is a little bit convex, I want to make sure I have a handle that's going to hold this thing down flat. You know, other things that you can do is you can have fences here that have a feather board on it. I'm doing a top and a bottom here. I'm going to be sanding them anyways, so I will get any kind of burns or anything that came up as I was going through here. I'll get those off with the sandpaper later on. I am going to get, though, a handle push block so I can go ahead and put some pressure on this as I go through. Here I have two. Okay, so I'm going to hold down this as I go through this. Last pass, I thought that I had cut everything, so I didn't make any kind of take any precautionary steps like a backer board like this. And you can see that it did cause a little piece to chip out here, which I'm going to glue and tape on then. Okay. So I'm just going to open it up, put glue inside there, and then put some green tape over top of that, and I'll sand that down later on. Okay, it's going to hold that down. Now I'll do the opposite side. Until the end. I'm going to have my backer board on when I do the end. So that's all three sides of this. You can see the roundovers on all three sides here. Again, the bit that I used caused a little bit of a point on the end there. So I'm gonna get some sandpaper, I'm gonna sand that over. The end grain, there's no direction to sanding, so you can just go ahead and go back and forth from that point to dumb that down. And on the front edge here, just go with the grain. And the last one, once that glue is dry, I'll finish that one up also. So again, my setup is as so. I have the table clamped here. A good idea would be for us to do one practice piece before you go ahead and work on your project, and be certain that you understand that we need a backer board at the back, which is going to prevent the chip out from happening. Okay?